The opportunity here is for you to be able to workshop some ideas and to talk through a formula that works. I'm breaking this down into like two different categories. I think often people just need some framework you can use. I know there's a lot of grievances with Bloom's taxonomy. For a little while, they were kind of beaten up on it. And I think it's different from, say, like learning styles, which I don't believe are a thing. But I think what's helpful about Bloom's taxonomy is that it gives you the verbiage to essentially have an umbrella category that it falls within. So like if you're looking for synthesis, we want to have that top tier, but you may not always want people to be inventing things. So it's helpful just to know kind of, okay, what is the expectation that I have of the learner? And then it helps me organize and structure the training accordingly. So I like Bloom's taxonomy in terms of using the verbiage, but I don't think that it's something that you have to commit to. Another one that's really great, obviously, is just simply a SMART goal. We tend to underutilize this framework because it's so stupid simple. And I think it's kind of, if it's simple, it's good for a reason. Like there's some benefit to that. And so I think whatever framework that you're happy with, I would recommend just sticking with that framework. There are other ones like Agile. There are some pieces with Addy and Sam and all these other like frameworks. But I think that just picking a framework is a really important part to start. When you think about a learning objective, what are some features that stand out to you as like, that's a solid objective?
So I think it has to be specific enough for the learner to know what we want them to be able to know or do.
Yeah.
As a result of the training. And an objective should only have one objective in it that targets that ultimate learning goal.
I think that's a really big piece that we kind of neglect, which is this like having the specific kind of action, the knowing and the doing. I'd also add that like I really think it's important that they use a specific kind of active verb. Too often we have conversations that are really sloppy or lazy. Mm-hmm. In talking about the knowing and doing, I really think that it's important that these learning objectives describe an observable and measurable behavior. It's so much more evident when you start talking like, what do I see and what are they doing? Action and images is really important. I use that as a foundation for storytelling because, in a script, you don't write out people's thoughts. You write what they do and you write how they act and what you see on screen. And so it's very similar in that framework. There should be some addressing of the learner's innate desire or what they would get out of this. And it's a really misstep. Like I remember the first time I took David Mamet's masterclass. I'm not a huge fan of masterclass in terms of like learning design. I think they have some issues that they need to overcome. But I was so inspired. The first module, I was like, this got me revved up. I say this both because I know that they don't do a great job there at creating learning objectives. They're very much about celebrity and inspiration. That's their whole business model. And so if we can tap it even to like a fraction of that for our programs, it makes them so much more doable from the learner's perspective and exciting. Like they actually want to take the lessons. So that's a really big piece of it.
So what would an example of that be when you are satisfying a desire?
The main thing is like linking the technical to the human. Okay. So if you are doing training on, let's say, Salesforce, you can have a training that just talks about the functions of Salesforce. You can say, yeah, you're going to do all these things. And so as a sales rep that comes in and says, oh, I got to learn this Salesforce, it can be daunting when you just lay on all the technical parameters, all the logistics of learning the program itself. But if you couch it as, I'm going to teach you how to better connect with your customers so that they become one giant family. Suddenly now I'm like, oh, wow, like I want to do this because I that's my goal as a salesperson, is to have this big family that I keep, connections with. And so if Salesforce enables me to have that human goal, I'm much more motivated to want to pursue that as a course of study. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Finally, there's an economic priority these learning objectives satisfy, that you're speaking to stakeholders in a language that they understand. It can be a little bit daunting if you don't have the data, but I guess in the interim, before you have the data, you're making estimations and you're making guesses. And so that's what we're going to try to add on to these. But all of this depends on the audience that you're speaking to. If you're talking to a stakeholder, you are using different learning objectives than if you're speaking to a learner or an employee. We're going to give a little scenario. This comes from Kathy Moore. She's got a really great blog on this, but I want to differentiate when we talk about what a sound learning objective is. And the hypothetical here is that you have a client that wants firefighters to educate the public about preventing fires. and quickly putting them out when they occur. Okay, so that's the goal. We're like, hey, this is important. It's why we're going to have training. So we've already determined that the problem that we're going to solve can be solved through training. When we're thinking of like what a good learning objective is, we might have something to the effect of this, where it's like fire-related losses in our region will decrease 10% by next year as firefighters prevent and extinguish brush and forest fires. Okay, so that's a learning objective that we've come up with. None of this describes what is actually being covered. We're going to talk about the prevention, but what does it actually look like? And so if we look at kind of like these, what I'm calling skill objectives, it's almost a variation of learning objective in that you're really talking about it as a skill that somebody develops and applies. Here are 5 potentials. So when you're thinking about the learning objective, what is the best of these?
I would say D is to have happen as a result of this training.
Yeah, but you notice that all of these are viable. You probably have seen these in this context of people
Right.
dividing. But really, like you're 100% right that D is actually like the best answer because it describes what we want them to be able to do and it's measurable. Some questions that pop up for people is, well, what's wrong with these other ones? Why not also have them? My response is both that it wastes time, that you have all this other preemptive stuff that you have to build. But the main thing is that you cannot guarantee that they're going to actually apply that knowledge based on that learning objective. We can add to this. We can add metrics around this. I thought the original learning objective was good in terms of the metrics, but we want to be able to identify what is the overarching skill that's required to be able to do this. You may have something where what is required for them to be able to extinguish this? What is the knowledge that is required to get them up to speed to demonstrate that skill? You could add complexity to the learning objective to determine how will you know that the brush fire is actually extinguished? And that might be something as simple as you could put your hand to the coals and not be burned, like they're not warm to the touch. You get to choose what the metric is. And I think that this is a really important piece because this is how you support to stakeholders what they want to know. They want the evidence of what's going to happen. And so inherently, you're going to be asking yourself these questions about the objective once you define what it is. I'm using a 4-step process here. And this is what I would recommend. So if you want to even just screenshot this, this is kind of like the Cliff's Notes of this presentation and what I think that your team would need to know, which is you're going to identify that desired outcome. And it's a combination of knowledge and action. What are the learners knowing? What are they doing? You're going to choose an action verb that sets that up, like extinguish, right? It's not just understand or gain awareness of. I think those are very dangerous verbs to use because they're too vague. We want to add context and criteria. So we'll get into a little bit more of the context, but that was kind of like what I said with making the technical human. Also, you could just add a because statement to it. And I'm going to describe a very clear one in a few slides here. But in addition to that context of setting up the stage for why this matters, you're also saying this is how we're going to measure it. I will know that my car is clean after you have completed this 14-point checklist. Very, very clear, right? If the mats still have dirt on them, they haven't been vacuumed, I know you didn't do it the steps correctly. And I can give you feedback. And I think this is another important component to training in general is where there are opportunities for us to modify behavior and develop the skills so that it becomes automatic. And then finally, I strive for clarity. There's so much weird jargon and unnecessary words. And it's just like, let's get simple with it. All right, here's a great template. By the end of this time/course, learners will be able to, the action verb, the skill, and the criteria. Okay, by the end of this workshop, learners will design a 30-minute lesson plan using backwards design principles, right? So you can look at backwards design principles and immediately know whether they've done it or not, right? So let's talk about yours. You said you had a couple things that you were working on. Like you don't have to have a learning objective, but what are some programs that you want to build? Or even this one that you were talking about with teaching your learning designers, what you want them to walk away with at the end of your workshops?
Okay, here's one thing we will be working on coming up is making them aware of and learning to use tools that will help them with web content accessibility standards, understanding the guidelines, and then applying those guidelines to their online resources that they distribute to their learners. So let's
workshop that a little bit. So you already have a set of criteria that would conform to ADA standards, right? You have that list.
Yes.
So that would be things like, just as an example, that you have alt text on images. The program can be used by a screen reader, that you avoid certain pitfalls like click here instead of just like the way that they have that more ideally set out. How many principles do you think are on that list, that checklist that you have? Like a dozen, 2 dozen?
Well, we haven't developed it like an actual checklist yet. Right now, where we are at is using our brand colors appropriately and understanding the color contrast guidelines.
Okay.
Right. So, so that's one place we're going to start. So
I think if you were on the last webinar, I had this already, but it's basically like, what's the main directive that you want, which you already stated, that I want them to be able to implement ADA principles to all of our training courses. And then what are the steps necessary for that to succeed? So we have this predominant problem. They need to apply or implement ADA standards to all training material. The different skills that they're going to have to be able to develop is understand the intersection of color contrast and our brand logos, right? Our brand elements. So like that's a really key piece that you're going to have a module on. You're going to have a module on alt text and the purpose and function of alt text. In a learner's perspective, you might be like 5 alt text tips that will save you hassle or like save your time. And so you're going to be able to create like quick little heuristics or shortcuts for them to be able to do. If my predominant skill is to write a nonfiction novel in 30 days, that's my goal. I might have an introduction to the nomenclature of books. And so you're like, I need to teach them chapters and appendices and all this stuff. They don't need to know that for writing the book in 30 days. Make sure that we're being effective with our time. What's the end goal? You want to turn an unhappy customer into a happy one in 5 quick steps.
Great.
You see how it reads like a blog article? It's like, that's it. It's like, that's what they're familiar with. And there's no shame in voicing it like a blog article. I think people really like that because it's familiar. Similarly, this is something that I often talk about because I find myself very frustrated with the way that organizations operate when they don't consider the economic priorities of their mission statement. So I've had some very high dollar people come through these presentations, and I'll go to the company websites to scope them out. And I'll look at their mission statements and I'll go, I have no idea what the hell you're talking about. Like I have literally no idea. This excerpt comes from Donald Miller's book, How to Grow Your Small Business. And I think it applies to large and small businesses alike. But he has 2 basic points here. He has, when you have a mission statement, it cannot be this weird, evergreen, vague, highbrow aspiration because no one's going to achieve it, right? Like world peace. It's like, we striving for world peace. Cool. Like when are you going to achieve world peace? And I think that there are lots of different ways that we can phrase this, but I think it's best to focus it on where you expect the growth to happen. So if you are looking at this at a quarterly perspective, you're going to adjust these numbers. If you're looking at it as a yearly goal, then you adjust those numbers. In this case, he's got this bakery. So we're going to sell 250 wedding cakes, promote 1 new flavor every month, and attract 2,500 new leads by the end of the calendar year. So I'm going to stop there because I think this is a great time-bound goal. And we know it's within a year, 250 wedding cakes. That's a great marker. You can break this down into quarters or to weeks, whatever increments you want. There's a very clear development goal, which is we're going to have this every month, a new flavor. And then we have a target number for new leads. So we got to find out like, okay, how are we going to get new leads? How are we going to acquire these people? Where are we going to meet them? Going back to that earlier piece where I was like, hey, when you're speaking to your learner, this is the key piece for me. It's like, it's the because statement. And in this mission statement he's got, it's like, look, we're selling all this stuff. We're doing all this business because our core mission is that we want people to be able to show off cakes at their wedding. We want them to be proud of the cake that they have at their wedding. That's a very, very emotional human desire. And so similarly, in all of your training, I think you should have one of these because statements.
Okay.
So going back to this is like, this to me, it was like mind blowing. Why I got into business doing this kind of work, doing instructional design and using movies as a learning modality is because I feel like everyone deserves to be inspired and to grow, regardless of what they've been given at the beginning, right? Like regardless of their education background or their experience. Some people might not be able to read, but I want them to still be able to be inspired and develop themselves personally and professionally. And so I use video as that modality. I need that because, and so I think it's similar to what you're looking for, right? Like you want people to understand accessibility standards because everyone deserves to learn at their own pace.
Great.
So
Yeah, I love that piece.
Awesome. We covered the good. I wanted to cover a couple of the bad and the ugly and just wrap up here with some kind of funny things. It's good when you see crappy ones, right? Like what
Yeah,
are some
like I do all the
objectives?
time.
Yeah. We all do. It's all iterative.
Yes.
It drives me nuts because there'll be things like appreciate art history is like such a weird one to me because like how do you measure it? It's not even
Right.
just subjective, it's not measurable, you know. And
Yeah.
so like there are things
Yeah.
like that like we got to be able to fill in. But now that we've gone through this, where's your spectrum on this? You think you could write like a great one? You feeling much better about the process, or you still at a 4?
Oh no, I'm feeling much better. I mean, where you pulled the mission statement too. Like, how cool is that to approach a mission statement like an objective? I'm thinking about a lot of mission statements I've read that, like you said, you're going, what are you talking about? And, you know, that they are just vague or flowery. A lot of times you'll just, they're very flowery, but,
Yeah.
and if you think of an objective like a mission statement and a mission statement like an objective, it makes so much sense. And it can, it can guide you a little bit better with that, with what your outcome is. So
Totally. Yeah. And I just want to thank you for, taking the time to jump through this. I do want to be conscious of your time and just that, I feel like doing these things is helpful. As I go through and promote what I'm trying to do, it's also just like, I know people are struggling with access to resources and even employment. I mean, I'm seeing so many like learning design friends that are just like not employed. And so it's kind of interesting to just try to offer, once a month, be like, hey, I'll come on and do some free little workshop or webinar. And I know we had pretty low attendance here, but also,
yeah. For me, I did have a coworker who was coming. I don't know what happened. She must have gotten pulled into a meeting or something. But did you say, are you sending out the recording?
Yeah, I'll send that out. And then if you guys have any questions, let me know. Like I said, I don't have anything like follow-ups. I usually like to try to tie it into the curriculum that I offer or the services that I offer. But I think for the most part, like I read a ton of this stuff. And so I'm always finding, new opportunities. I cannot recommend Kathy Moore enough. Map It is a phenomenal resource. Yeah. And even people that are like, oh yeah, I know of it. I'm like, did you read it? And they go, nah, but I'm like, read it. Read it. It changes your life. I mean, that and Thinking Fast and Slow are two resources in the learning community that everyone talks about, and very few people have actually done the work to read it. And they're great. They're entertaining. They're like, they so much time saved. But anything lingering for you?
Well, who is the author of Thinking Fast and Slow?
Daniel Kahneman, Kahneman. Okay. It's I think he won a Nobel Prize for that book. Oh. Like it's radical. Like you start to see how
that's one I haven't heard of.
Yeah, it's very, very good. And it's like the way that people solve problems is in basically two different tiers. You have like system 1 and system 2 thinking. And so like the one system shoots from the hip. It's like really quick. And so I think that's system 2. And so like you're just shooting from the hip. It does not have time for doubt or self-reflection. And then system 1 is like slower, more methodical, but it burns so many calories that most people defer to system 2. And so if you so if you ask someone a math problem, it's literally like asking them to go lift weights in front of you. And it's like the expectation that they can do that is too demanding. So it's like a good way to ease them in and to have shortcuts. Again, he's very much about the shortcut, like make a shortcut that's effective. But I think you'd love it. Yeah.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Awesome. Well, it was really great meeting you. Yeah.
I appreciate your time today, Richard. Thank you for sharing that.
You're very welcome.
I will certainly be using the information you shared for sure. So I do appreciate. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'll have it up in probably about a week. I'll share the link with you. Awesome.
Great. Perfect.
Thank you so much.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
You too.